Hello, you are watching sqadia.com, and today our lecture topic is nervous system. And we are on the fifth section of this topic, that is the developmental and clinical perspectives of the nervous system. In this, we will be going through two important functions, two important concepts, what happens when the reaction, how the reaction of injury occurs, what is axonal injury and what is degeneration and what is regeneration of the axons, and how this occurs in central nervous system and how it differs in the peripheral nervous system. A neuron is a basic functional unit of a nervous system. In a mature human, if it is destroyed by trauma or disease, it is not replaced. It is incapable of undergoing cell division. We have in cell cycles, there are different type of cycles that, for example, there is a G1 phase and there is G2 phase, and then there is a metaphase and anaphase and telophase. Now, it is believed that they actually go into G0 phase, which is there is no growth potential left in the nerve cells. So if they are destroyed, they cannot redivide to become, for example, like our skin, they cannot regrow. Rather, they are destroyed and degenerated, and they are replaced by astrocytes, which is the term is called as replacement gliosis. The neuron consists of cell body and its processes, the axons and the dendrites. As we know, the dendrites are the actually neurites which are bringing in the information or the stimuli, and the axons are the neurites which is taking away from the cell body. Neuroglial cells, in contrast to the neurons, are non-excitable and do not have axons. Furthermore, axon terminals do not synapse on them. They are smaller than the neurons, yet outnumber them 5 to 10 times. The first reaction of a nerve cell of injury is the loss of function. For example, if there is a disease or there is any trauma in case of head injury to the nerve cells, the first thing would be the loss of function. They will stop to function normally. Whether the cell recovers or dies will depend on the severity and duration of the damage agent. The greater the severity, the greater the duration when nerve cell is exposed, the greater will be the irreversible damage. But if it would have occurred for a less shorter period of time and mainly in the peripheral nervous system, recovery may be possible. Morphological evidence of cell injury requires a minimum of 6 to 12 hours of survival. For example, patient had an injury, but patient died within, let's say, 10 to 12 minutes, or maybe on-spot death post-trauma. Then, if on autopsy, there will be no signs of morphological changes or damaging which occurs in the neuron post-injury. But if the patient has survived, for example, after massive head injury, was resuscitated and went on to vent, then after maybe 5 7 days, eventually died, then only the morphological changes of a damage or injury to the axons or near nerve cells would appear. The nerve cells became swollen and rounded off. The nucleus swells and is displaced towards the periphery of the cell. The nasal granules become dispersed towards the periphery of the cytoplasm. When the cell death is imminent or has just occurred, the cell cytoplasm stains dark with the basic dyes. This is termed as hyperchromasia, and the nuclear structures become unclear. This is not very natural to any other cell. When any other cell dies, initially there is a swelling, there is loss of plasma membrane permeability, then gradually the whole thing becomes hazy, the nucleus becomes disappears, or it actually undergoes karyolysis. The nuclear membrane get disrupted, all the mitochondria, they stop producing ATPs, and gradually the microtubules and all the transport which is occurring in the cell goes down. Cytoplasm tends to start to shrink, and the cytoplasm becomes vacuolated, and the nucleus in the cytoplasmic organelles is disintegrated. The neuron now is dissolved and removed by activity of phagocytosis. The chronic forms of injury, the size of cell body is reduced, the nucleus and cytoplasm show hyperchromatism, and the nuclear membrane and these cytoplasm organelles show irregularity. Axonal injury and degeneration. Axonal reaction and axonal degeneration, the changes that take place in nerve cell when axon is cut or injured. Changes starts to appear within 24 to 48 hours of the injury. The degree of change will depend on the severity of the injury to the axon and how close it is to the cell body. The nerve cell becomes rounded off, swollen, and the nucleus swells and becomes eccentrically placed. As in a normal cell is centrically placed, it becomes eccentric. That is, goes towards the side. And the nasal granules, which are a part of the endoplasmic reticulum, become dispersed towards the periphery of the cytoplasm, as they were present mainly over the endoplasmic reticulum, forming the rough endoplasmic reticulum, but they get detached and get dispersed towards the periphery. These changes reach their maximum in about 12 days. As over here you can appreciate, this is a CT scan of a patient which is showing there may be some kind of a bleed or post-traumatic intracerebral hemorrhage. Now, this has actually happened, but over 6 hour period they've actually become more apparent. It may be doubtful over here, as you can compare the contrast is almost similar, but over if you see over here, there's no such thing as over here, but this was classically the hemorrhage which has actually become more pronounced over 6 to 12 hours. What is actually showing is in this that at times what actually happens is that it once it's 6 to 12 hours it minimum required for the axonal injuries to become apparent, and initially there's only loss of function and we are not sure whether the actually axonal injury has occurred or not occurred. Coming to the regeneration and degeneration of the axons if they get damaged. In the peripheral nervous system, the section of axon is followed by attempt at regeneration, which is termed as Verlaine regeneration, and a reparative changes take place in the cell body. While the central nervous system, the degeneration is not followed by regeneration. If the corticospinal tracts, for example, are destroyed by disease, and nerve cells that give rise to these axons degeneration and disappear completely. Now, what actually happens is, what is the corticospinal tract? We need to understand for that. It is a tract which actually arises in the motor cortex and it gradually descends down, then it decussates and eventually descends down to the spinal cord and synapses in the spinal cord, and then there's a spinal nerve which comes out and it's actually controlling our voluntary function of the muscles, for example. And if that is destroyed over any area, either there's a transactional corticospinal tract in the spinal cord level post-trauma, or there may be a disease of the motor neuron where actually the corticospinal tract is originating, all this would result in paralysis or hemiplegia of the opposite side. The right controls the left and the left controls the right. So the diagram on the right side is actually showing in what happens in CNS. If the axonal injury has occurred over here, this would be cleared up by the macrophages and there will be no basically regeneration. This would be left with this thing. But in peripheral nervous system, for example, if your radial nerve or if median nerve gets transected, depending upon what kind of transaction it is, if not there may be an attempt to regeneration, and at times in certain cases complete recovery is always possible. This is classically macrophages, and there's actually attempt to degenerate. Sometimes it is complete attempt and results in complete normalization of function. Sometimes the attempt is there, but it's a failed attempt and is a result of fibrotic scar as fibrosis occurs in the peripheral nervous system as well. And this we have actually covered what is the reaction of an axon to an injury. In CNS, once there is axon is damaged, there is initial loss of function and it will not regenerate. But in peripheral nervous system, usually there is an attempt. Sometimes it is successful and sometimes it's not, but there is always an attempt to regenerate in the peripheral nervous system. Thank you very much. Keep watching sqadia.com.